So I'm really delighted to welcome Brian Jeffrey to speak to us tonight, VE3UU, and also all our guests. There's 75 participants on right now, which is probably an all-time high for us. So congratulations, Brian. And we invited Brian because he's the lead volunteer for the Cold War Museum in the Diefenbunker in KWARC, which is just west of Ottawa. And the Diefenbunker was the plan for the top officials for the Canadian government in case of something untoward by way of attack during the Cold War. I'm not sure. I'm hoping Brian can tell us things about how the Cold War Museum got started and what the intention was for the Diefenbunker and any suggestions he'd have for maybe what would be a value proposition for a regional government for our own little bunker. But, you know, the way I met Brian was about 5 years ago. I saw Helicrafter's SX-101, a big tube receiver that probably weighs about 90 pounds, advertised on KWARC Swap. And Brian was selling it on behalf of the Cold War Museum, raising funds for the museum there, and then nicely took it home and looked after it till the next time I drove up to Ottawa. Let me just share my screen while I talk about Brian a bit. So this is Brian at one of his boat anchor, we call them, for the newbies. That means tube equipment. One of his tube equipment stations. He's also got a very modern station in KARP. But here's Brian as a teenager when he was first licensed with a Heathkit DX35 and VFO down here, and an NC300 National NC303 receiver, which I think I spot just over his right shoulder in the background. Current picture. So Brian's been a ham for a while, and he's got a background of interest to us in computing, those of us who are in computing stuff, because he helped install and operate one of the first commercial computers in Canada, the first commercial computer sold in Canada, the Ferranti Mark I, which was actually built in Manchester and kind of came out of the World War II computing technology research stuff, and went to U of T, and then from U of T to NRC, the National Research Center. And here he is sitting at the console. You have to wear a tie when you used a computer back then, it was very formal. Probably at the age of 18 or 19 as an electronics technician. I don't know if you're going to talk about the Ferranti much, but it had something like 3,600 tubes, and kind of they were in banks of 48 or 50 in drawers. And one of the things Brian had to do was to keep the tubes all working, and like several would fail a day, or at least a few. And then by time he was 20, he'd gone up to the Arctic, to the distant early warning line, a line of like about 60 radar stations across the northern part of Canada and Alaska, and even into Greenland and Iceland. So he had a few years of experience up there at stations like this one. So big radar dome or radome, and a lot of electrical work to be done. And he's written a book about his DEW line and Arctic experiences, Adventures from the Coldest Part of the Cold War, which you can get by e-transferring or PayPaling 1950 to Larry at cannavbooks1n.com. So Brian, with that, I'd like to hand things over to you, and thank you so much for being here.
Okay, well, this is going to be novel for me. Let me try to share my screen. And by the way, thank you for the introduction. Obviously, I'm an incredibly interesting person. One of the things that was missing from Vic's introduction is the fact that I'm also incredibly modest, but I don't like to bring that up too often. Let me see what happens here. Oh, hang on. So here's where I'm going to take you today. So we'll look at what is and what was the Diefenbunker as time goes by. We're going to let you know a little bit about the Diefenbunker and some of its information in terms of the statistics and the communications and so forth, things that are of interest to us as amateurs. The general public wouldn't be too interested in it, of course. Then we will get to talking about the birth of a museum, because I know that's of interest to you folks with your bunker you have down in Kitchener. And I don't know much about your bunker. I do know a little bit, which I'll share with you at the time. Then what I thought I'd do is give you a little bit of a tour of the museum, just the highlights. I mean, normally it takes me an hour, hour and a half to walk somebody through the museum. I'm going to pick some of the highlights that I think might be of interest to you. But I just want to tempt you so that you're keen enough that you want to come back and maybe plan on a trip up some weekend to visit the museum on its own. Then, of course, I want to talk about the volunteer radio group. We call us the VRG, which we morphed into the Diefenbunker Amateur Radio Club, or DARK, as we like to call it, come out of the dark. Actually, you go into the dark when you go into the bunker. And I want to give you just a little bit of a tour of the volunteer radio group area and some of the things we have there, so you can see what you might be able to do with your own bunker. And then we're going to sort of end up with a Q&A. So just as we get started, this is a picture of the station's crest. And the more prominent features on that crest is, of course, is I know you all are familiar with Latin, of course, at the bottom that says communicate and protect. And that was sort of the main theme of the bunker. There are 12 maple leafs around the outside, one for every province and territory. And then the most prominent feature on that crest is the three-headed dog, and it's Cerberus. And mythology tells us that Cerberus guards the gates of hell. And I've often told people during my tour when we're in the bunker, as we walk through the main entranceway, that the doors we've just come in, that after a nuclear war, those would indeed be the gates of hell. So in order to get to those gates, you got a 150-foot walk down a massive tunnel, which I'll show you in a minute or two. So what is or what was the Diefenbunker? Well, essentially, it was the largest of 7 government bunkers built across Canada. The largest bunker in Canada is really North Bay. That's where NORAD has theirs. That's a military bunker. The other 6 bunkers are located in Debert, Nova Scotia, Valcartier, Borden, Ontario, closest one to you, Debert, Manitoba, and there's one in Nanaimo, and I've forgotten what the sixth one is, but it's there in my back of my mind somewhere. But apart from the bunker closest to you, which are called Regional Emergency Government Headquarters, REGHQs, would be the one in Borden, Ontario. There are other things called ZEGHQs and MEGHQs. That's a Zone Emergency Government Headquarters. Toronto's, for example, is located in Aurora, Ontario, just a little bit of the east of Yonge Street. Your bunker would have been considered a Municipal Emergency Government Headquarters, an MEGHQ, and I got your bunker confirmed as that was its title. I know very little about the MEHQs. I did visit the one in Aurora some long time ago. So what was the primary purpose of these bunkers in a whole? Well, the first and largest and most primary purpose was for continuance of government, called COG program. And the theory was that if you could continue to govern your country, even though you've been attacked, you're less likely to be attacked. And when you think of it, it sort of worked. A little humor there, not much apparently. In any event, the other part of the purpose for the bunkers was to have a secure communication system and a center to operate that system from. And so why did all these things become necessary? Well, I noticed from the pictures of many of the people that are on the Zoom meeting tonight that you're all the same long tooth as I am. So you probably understand what the term Cold War means. But one of the greatest explanations I ever got of the Cold War, when I was taking a tour of young people through, and I asked them, why was it called the Cold War? And the snappiest answer I got from a 12-year-old, he said, because they fought it in the wintertime. I thought that was a great answer. Wrong one, of course. It was called the Cold War because essentially no weapons were fired during the two antagonists, which was the USSR and USA. Interestingly enough, during the Cold War, which ended around 84, 85 with the fall of the Berlin Wall, there were at least two major hot wars, Vietnam and Korea, and a number of smaller wars, hot wars that went on during that period of time. So there was a lot of what we call saber rattling between the two major powers. And what was happening is that Canada was sandwiched right in between the two major powers. If you look at a map, you've got over the pole, you have the USSR, and down south of us, you have the USA, and there we are, the ham in a very difficult sandwich. So people, we knew they were going to go to war because we were only 15 years away from World War II. Now, we live in a generation, and your sons and your daughters and some of your grandchildren have never known war, where we have. I was born in 1940 at the beginning of World War II. I don't remember the war, but I remember the wars that occurred after that. So we've been living war-free for about 40 years now, 40, 50 years. But back then, we still had that terrible memory of 5 years of war, and we were ready to go to war again. And we needed to be prepared, and hence that's why the bunkers came about. So here's a photograph of the bunker. As you can see, it's a rather large building. Of course, you can't see it because it's underground. The building itself is 154 feet to a side. It's buried in here. I don't know if you can see my cursor on the screen. Can you see my cursor, by the way? Probably not. Yeah. Is that a yes or a no?
No.
Okay, not to worry about it then. But in that picture, you'll see a small building off to the lower lower right rather. That's the old engineering building, which became a library. You'll see a guardhouse. You'll see a helicopter pad. The small white building near the helicopter pad, just a little bit to the right of it, is the Butler building. That's the entrance to the bunker, which is, of course, all underground. The building way at the far left is the old all ranks mess, which is now a community center. The building actually had its own municipal-sized sewage system, enough to serve as a small town. And the area in the bottom part of the photograph, which has now been reclaimed and given back to the farmers, but that was the original sewage pond, which a lot of the station enlisted men considered as the officers' swimming pool. So building the Diefenbunker occurred between 1959 and 1961. It took 18 months to design and build this building. It was basically an engineering feat. It was designed by the Military Corps of Engineers, but built by the foundation company out of Montreal. The building contains 32,000 cubic yards of concrete and about 5,000 tons of steel. And that's more concrete and steel than you'll find in a 10-story building in downtown Kitchener-Waterloo. The outside walls of the building had to be poured in one continuous pour because they could not have a seam in the building. They had trucks coming out day and night for a period of time in order to get that pour done. Now, the building cost about $20 million to build and another $20 million to equip with equipment. Those are $1960. The equivalent today would be about $400 million. And sometimes when I'm on my tour and I mention the price of all that, some people will say, what a waste, what an incredible waste of money. And I used to ponder that for a little while. And then I finally got around to asking some of these people, do you have fire insurance on your house? And they say, oh, well, of course we do. I said, well, is that a waste? You don't use it. The Diefenbunker was essentially an insurance policy that Canada would be able to govern itself in case of war. So it's much like fire insurance. You really pray you don't have to use it. And unfortunately for us, we never did. Now, the black building you see on just to the right of that photograph is the Bank of Canada Vault. I'm going to show you another picture of that a little later on. Now, the facility itself was supposed to be secret. It was basically called the Experimental Army Signals Establishment. This is another construction photograph. And we kept that secret in true Canadian fashion for about 20, 30 minutes. What happened was a reporter for the Toronto Star George Brimmel, flew over the site in a light plane, counted 78 toilets and packing crates, and published an article in the Toronto Telegram letting the whole world know where the Canadian bunker was. Thank you, the power of the press. Contrast this with the United States. Their equivalent bunker to ours is in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, called Greenbrier. You can check this out on the internet. Built about the same time, just a little larger than our bunker, and it was kept secret until 1991, I believe, when a reporter for the Washington Post blew the whistle on that place, and they shut it down within 2 days. Now, the article you see on the screen, if you could look at the date, which is absolutely fascinating, the date on that is 9/11, October 9/11. So, communications in the bunker, it was essentially by teletype for its entire career. And what they did, they had what was called a torn tape relay system, where you would actually have the message type out on one machine, they would tear it off that machine and put it on the next machine to send it out. And what they had for the most cases were a lot of Model 15 and Model 28 teletypes in the early years. And then in the latter years, they went to Model 40s, which are a lot fancier, and we have some of those in the building now. And I'll talk about where radio comes into this in a couple of moments. But from the torn tape system, torn tape relays, they moved to an automated switching system. And the original computer in the building was a system called STRAD, which stood for Signal, Transmit, Receive, and Distribution System. And STRAD, highly mechanical, but it would store messages in memory and then send them out again. So there was no taking the tape off one machine and putting it on the other. This was all happening automatically, and up to about 100,000 messages a month could be handled in this manner. So the bunker itself, a great part of it, and this was about the 400 level of the building, the top level, was the military's floor, and this is where STRAD was. This is also where the rest of the communication systems were. A lot of the communications was by landline, and the switching panel, or the telephone switchboard on the left, was one of the 6 original switchboards that were manned 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. Then they migrated over to the automated switching system, which you see on the right, and then they went even more electronic in the latter years. Now, when they shut down the bunker, they took a chainsaw, went across all the wiring, and just cut it out of the building. So it took us forever trying to trace wires down inside the building, ultimately to put a phone system back in again, which we did. Now, the bunker itself was called the receiver building, R1, and it was chock-a-block loaded with receivers. There was essentially about 15 to 20 Raycal RA-17s, at least one for every key circuit that the building had. And those were migrated later to Rockwell Collins HF 2050s. The 2050s were not installed in the bunker. They were installed at the antenna sites, what I'll talk about in a few moments, with the audio signals being brought back to the bunker. So these Rockwell Collinses were about 10 kilometers away from the main bunker, and they were remotely controlled from the bunker. Also, what we had was about 4 to 6 Hammerlin SP600s, and they were used for low frequency work. There was a 325-foot tower on the site, which was comprised of 80 acres, and that was for LF communications. Very seldom used, but it was there. Now, the antenna sites for the bunker were actually remoted. They were 10 kilometers away in Elmont, Ontario, and another 10 kilometers north in Dunrobin, with wires being brought back. And that's how the bunker remained technically, electronically isolated. And I'll talk a little bit about the transmitter in a couple of moments. As far as amateur radio in the bunker was concerned, there was very little of it. This is VE3UU, Government of Canada. This was an unofficial non-sanctioned amateur radio station in the bunker in the late 60s and early 70s. And it had the call sign VE3SIG. Now, we've been unable to find much about that. We've been looking for operators who might have known where. We know where it was in the building, but we don't know what it was. But VE3UU came about in 1994. And it was installed in the building by the emergency preparedness people, which were government or civilian authorities, not to do with the military, because they wanted to have HF communications with the other 6 bunkers that was separate from the military. They needed basically a backup system. This is the only picture we have of the original setup. We know what was in there was the Yaesu FT902DM with an attendant monitor and a speaker. There was also an FL2100 linear. You can see that on the left-hand side. There was also a Dentron T2000 DKR3K8 tuner rather. And finally, there was a Transworld T2000 linear, which is over in the far right cabinet. Plus there was a Pi VHF set, which was interesting because that was used to communicate with downtown Ottawa and National Defense Headquarters, but it was also used by the Diefenbunker site MPs because when they left the building, they could not communicate back into the building again as their system was originally set up. So they would actually tap into the civilian VHF radio and use that to talk back into the bunker when they're doing the rounds outside the facility. There was also an ASCII teleprinter, as you can see on the far right of the photograph. So that was the original station, and I'll come back to that a little later on. By the way, that equipment was stripped out of the bunker. And around the year, what was it, around 2000 or so, all of our equipment appeared again on our doorstep. It came from the emergency college in Arnprior, just showed up, dropped off, and the car drove away. When we didn't know why it was there. We didn't even know what it was till we brought it all in and we're looking at this gear, and somebody looked at the photograph on the wall and said, this is our original stuff back. And so what you'll see later is the original gear that was installed in 1984 rather, and it's still operational to this day. Now the transmitters for the bunker were not located here in the bunker itself. The transmitter was located a little outside Perth, Ontario, about 30 to, I think, well, it's more like 50 kilometers away. And they located the bunkers or the transmitters that far away in order so that if an enemy was going to hone in on transmitted signals, they were going to drop the bombs on people in Perth rather than the bunker. And our connection, all our transmitted signals were carried by landline from the bunker underground over to Perth. The transmitters were 10 kilowatt transmitters, FRT39s, FRT101, 501s, and a GPS 750. I have a photo of the 750 I'll show you in a moment, but they were all sold for scrap. We got $250 for them from Cohen Scrapyard when they shut down the transmitter station in Richardson, which is going to be called T1. This is a photo of the TMC transmitter, 10 kilowatts. And it was used primarily to communicate, whoops-a-daisy, let me go back, see if I can go back. Okay, clicked on the wrong slide there. So I'm going to just stay where I am because I don't want to screw this up. But the transmitters were used to communicate with the other 6 bunkers primarily, and with the USA through their communication system down there, plus with Boddington in the UK. And the Boddington allowed us a communications gateway into Europe. So those were the prime purposes for the communications. That was the channel. And the radio channels were augmented by landlines, both CP and CN. In fact, an interesting side story is the government was getting concerned about Bell Canada being the only ones that could provide lines because they didn't want to have all of their eggs in one basket, as it were. So they put it out to tender to CN and CP. The CN got the contract, but because CN didn't have enough lines, they had to lease them from Bell Canada. Interesting stories as things go around. So the birth of a museum, part 1 for you guys. First of all, it has a very long gestation period, somewhat akin to the elephant, African elephant, about 640 days. Took a long time to make this happen. And what happened in 1994 when the building was shut down and stripped empty, and it was basically abandoned by the government. They walked away from it, and in so doing, they allowed the township to purchase it. So the township purchased about 80 acres of land along with the buildings. There was the all ranks mess, which they didn't know what to do with. There was a line building, which they thought turned into a fire hall. There was the engineering building, which was built for a cost of $2 million 1 year before the bunker was shut down. Your tax dollars at work. But they wanted that for a library. And then they had the bunker itself, which they didn't know what to do with. So as I say here, the engineering building became the library. They had hoped to build a fire hall. It didn't work out. And so they struggled at finding a tenant for the main building, the bunker. They couldn't find anybody that wanted to take on this monstrosity. They had a number of proposals. One is to turn it into a marijuana grow-up. But at that time, in 1994, 95, marijuana was not a very popular item, so we thought the optics would be bad. We didn't have somebody who wanted to fill it up with water and use it for a scuba diving experience. I thought that would be a fascinating one. After people were missing for a couple hours, you just didn't worry about them anymore. So basically, they couldn't find any way to get rid of the building in a profitable way. So the plan was to seal it forever. They were going to pour concrete down all the air vents and the blast tunnel, which I'll show you shortly, and simply walk away from the building. But prior to doing that, what they did is they were running tours through the building in order to raise money for the library, which they needed to refit. And we raised a fair chunk of change doing that. So part two then is what happened and why didn't the building get sealed? Well, really, there was just a small group of very dedicated individuals. I was not one of them. I came on just a little later when this happened. I did do my tours through there, paid my money. In fact, what happened is I was on my 4th paid tour when somebody recognized that I'd been there before, and he said, why don't you come and be one of our guides, which is ultimately what I did. In any event, on the last weekend, when we were going to, the trucks were coming out on Monday to pour concrete down the air vent and the blast tunnels, we got a phone call from a politician and who recognized how popular this was, and he said, what can I do to help? Because politicians like to get on any bandwagon they can, of course. And the lady on the phone, Trixie Trellum, said, stop the trucks. And I don't quite know the whole story after that, but he basically got the cement truck stopped. So the filling of the air vents and the filling of the blast tunnel did not occur. So then what happened over a period of about 2 years, the gestation period of an African elephant, this small group of dedicated individuals led by Dr. Barry Bruce, one of KWARC's more prominent physicians, convinced the government to sell them the building. And quite frankly, the township, and I wouldn't be surprised if Kitchener-Waterloo didn't fall in the same category, they were absolutely delighted to get rid of the liability. They wanted out from under this thing. So what happened is this group bought 13 acres of land and the building for $3. We figured we've been ripped off. We're trying to get our money back. It hasn't worked out too well, but we continue to plug away at trying to make our money. So my involvement in the bunker occurred around 1997. I've been on the board of directors. I've been a volunteer since then. I wrote the Guide's Guide to the Bunker. I started the volunteer radio group with a couple other folks way back then. And so essentially I've been involved for around 22 years. I've given so many tours of the building, I can no longer remember how many. And the building basically is now morphed into what we are and where we are today. So what I'm going to do is sort of give you just a couple of thoughts before I move on, is we morphed from being basically a 100% volunteer-driven museum, and we did that for 3 or 4 years. And then we finally got 1 paid employee, then we got 2 paid employees, and we sort of ended up morphing into a fully blown museum. Now, frankly, I'm not sure that was a good thing. I have a personal opinion that when we got to the fork in the road where we had to decide, do we want to be a museum or do we want to be a visitor attraction, the overwhelming view at the time was we should become a museum because there's a certain benefit, I suppose, to being a museum. I'm not sure that turned out to be the best thing, because as a museum, we run into all kinds of hassles trying to get anything done nowadays, because museums are run by museum people who are incredibly risk adverse and have so many rules to live by that it makes running the place an extremely difficult thing. Fortunately, I'm just a volunteer again now, so I don't worry about that. I let the museum go on its way, but has been a challenge. So I want to give you a little bit of a mini tour, just so you can see, get a little bit of a flavor for the place, and then tell you about the VRG. So what you see on your screen now is basically the entranceway to the museum. The tunnel on the left is 370 feet long, about 150 meters. And the entranceway to the building is halfway down that blast tunnel. The purpose of the blast tunnel was to take the overpressure off the main doors in case of a nuclear explosion. Pressure comes in one end, goes out the other, doesn't matter which way, but whoever or whatever is in the tunnel at that time will disappear. The picture on the right is the main entranceway. The left-hand doors are hydraulic driven. There's a pair of them. It's an airlock system. At no time are both doors open at the given time, be one door or the other. You can pass about 400 people through that door if you have to, by fitting through about 20 at a time. Doorway is 2 tons. The doors behind the gentleman see who is Dave Peters, that's the freight doors. There are 2 of them, manually operated, very well balanced. You can move them with your finger, but you certainly, once you got them moving, would not want to have your finger get in the way because they won't stop very quickly. So here's one of the other popular items in the museum is the CBC studio in the control room. There's Dave standing in the studio part of it, looking through the glass into the control room. Picture on the right, of course, is the control room equipment. It was all stripped out of the building because I think I mentioned, but I'll mention again, the building was stripped empty. Coax cables cut off at the surface, everything. It was basically an empty building. We were actually selling chips of stone off the wall and selling them as bunker bits during the early tours to try and raise money for the library. Interestingly enough, the equipment you see there, which is on loan to the museum from the War Museum, was installed by a gentleman called Jim Morrison. Not the Jim Morrison, but Jim spent his 15 years at the CBC as a technician, coming to the Diefenbunker every 6 months to test this equipment to make sure it was equal to or better than new. The equipment is still operational this day. People look in and see long playing records, reel-to-reel tapes, have no clue what they are. Looking ahead on just under the right-hand side tape recorder, you'll see a control panel down there. And there's a switch on that panel called a CD1 alarm. And had that switch been thrown, it would have sent a signal to key CBC stations all across Canada, telling them that in 30 seconds, their studios will become disconnected from their transmitters, and this studio, the studio you see on the picture, will become connected to their transmitters. So who was ever in the studio at that time would have been able to communicate with the entire nation. Here's a photograph of the cafeteria area. Cafeteria seats about 240 people at a seating, so it would take probably 2 to 3 seatings to put everybody through. The building will hold 535 people at full capacity. There were 3 separate eating areas. The main area, which you see there, is for the average person, but rank has its privileges, and there was a separate eating area for non-commissioned officers and another separate dining room for officers and government ministers. There would have always been enough fresh food on hand for 7 days for 535 people. Then you revert to things called MREs, meals ready to eat, also known as meals rejected by everybody. In Canada, they're actually called IMPs, individual meal packs. On the floor down below the cafeteria, level 1 level down, is the main freezer, and that's where the food would have been kept, and that freezer also doubles as the morgue. Enough fresh food and dry food on hand for 30 days. Of course, the question comes up from time to time of what happens if I'm in the bunker longer than 30 days and we can't get out because the world's gone to hell in a handbasket. And my advice is always, don't sleep a lot, keep on the move, and don't look appetizing. Here's a photograph of the hospital. The bunker had a fully equipped hospital, complete with an operating room, infirmary, x-ray machine, small lab, doctor's examining area, and so forth. You'll notice on the right in the operating room that the nurse has no heads. We hire head nurses with no heads because they eat less and they don't take up as much space as normal nurses do. The station also had a torture chamber known as a dental office. So the station was well equipped to look after everybody for as long as they were going to be in there. And the lockdown, of course, would have been 30 days. They figured after that, radiation would have died down and they'd be able to get out and manage the country again. Here's a creative use of radiator hose. This is a typical washroom. This happens to be in the hospital area. You'll notice on the bottom of the toilet, between the bowl and the frame, you see a black material there. That's actually about a 1.5-inch plinth of rubber. So, and rather than having copper piping connecting the toilet to the main system, it's radiator hose. And that's because the building was designed to withstand a 5 megaton ground burst about 1.1 mile away. And had that happened, the building would have moved. And it was designed to move an inch, inch and a half in any direction and still remain functional. So what you didn't want to have happen in that situation is that your pipes started to break and you had water pouring all over the building. So all the toilets were connected to their systems, to the main system by radiator hose. Here's a photograph of the Bank of Canada vault. Dave Peters is standing beside it. That door you see there weighs 13 tons. The door and the frame weighs a total of 30 tons. It requires 4 people with separate combinations to open, and it was intended to hold Canada's gold reserve in case of war. Now, we cannot find the plans to bring the gold out here, but it must have existed at one time. But even the Bank of Canada doesn't know, how they're going to get the gold out. We've done all kinds of calculations as to how many freight trains and how many buses or trucks would have been required. And it would have been an enormous venture, and it would have had to been done well before the country went to war. Now, when I was on the DO line, my job was to give you folks down south about 6 hours notice that hell was about to break loose, and that wouldn't have been near enough time to get the gold out. So the idea was that as international tensions rose in the world, well before the poop hit the fan, the gold will be brought out, senior government officials will come out, set up their offices. Then in the last hours or days, the politicians will come out. Now, why we're going to let the politicians in is a bit of a mystery, but that is why the place was there. So that sort of concludes the brief tour of the building. And I want to take a look now at the volunteer radio group, which we call the VRG, also known as the Diefenbunker Amateur Radio Club. We only became dark about a year or two ago when we were running into problems with the museum people in trying to get a tower put up. We fought with them. I'll show you the tower in a couple of minutes, but we fought with them for probably 4 or 5 years because they are so risk adverse and they're so worried about absolutely everything that they just get paralyzed into doing anything. So we ended up having to pay $1,000 for an engineering drawing for a concrete pad. They were so concerned about insurance that we ended up becoming a club in order to get rack insurance so that if there was a problem, we'd be covered. It went on and on and on. The tower's now up. The tower belongs to the bunker. It's no longer our responsibility. So things have gotten a little better since then. But and we've decided to just remain as dark. But we don't have any meetings. We have no fees. It's a very informal, casual group. We are self-funded. We take any equipment people will give us, and if we can't put it on display, if we can't use it ourselves, we sell it in order to get funds to keep our equipment going. And we've done very well over the years, so forth. But the VRG itself started with a borrowed FT101 and a $1,500 donation. And as I mentioned earlier, we started with an empty building. And I'll show you some photographs in a little bit. But as we moved on 20 years, things have changed dramatically. So here's a picture of the emergency radio room. You saw this picture before, but this is what it looked like in '86 and what it looked like in 1999 when we finally were into the building and we're starting to get things set up. The original rack setup had 4 cabinets, where one is missing, the one on the far left is missing. It used to hold the VHF transmitter and receiver. So we supplemented another one just for the heck of it. And it is in the same room that the original equipment was. And there, we found the outline of the cabinets on the floor. So we've actually repositioned the cabinets back to the way they were in 1984 to 94 when the building was there. So this is a photograph of what the building, our emergency transmitter room rather, looks in 1996 and then in 2021. Dramatic change from over the eras. So what I want to do is I'm going to walk you through the emergency transmitter room. This, by the way, the transmitters in this room were never used. They were there as backup transmitters for the Perth transmitting site, which of course never went out of service, so we didn't have to worry about it. I'm going to walk you through the ETR from sort of left to right and give you an idea what some of the stuff is in that room. So the picture on the left-hand side is basically two things. There's some equipment that was located in the NORAD satellite uplink that is located near our bunker. And when it lost the protection of the bunker, they shut it down and walked away from it. But they left all the equipment in there. So we simply went down one day, walked in, loaded up all their transmitters and dragged them back up to the bunker. So a lot of what you'll see here is mainly eye candy, because this was an empty room when we took it over. So we've been finding stuff to put in. Also on the left-hand picture, you'll see a CBC transmitter. We got that from one of our volunteers, got it from a radio station in Quebec somewhere. I've forgotten the call sign. It's been gutted, so it's not very good shape. On the picture of the right, you'll see the CBC transmitter again, an FRT 502 RCF transmitter. It was never in the bunker. It's just eye candy. There's our logging station for our VE3CWM, and you'll see an RCA shipboard transceiver, which I'll tell you about in a couple of moments or so. We'll get back to it again. Here's again a picture, a little longer shot of the emergency transmitter room. The RCA transmitters on the left, you'll see our gear. I'm going to walk you through a little more careful of that stuff. You'll see a little better of it. The TV in the room is showing recent contacts around the world. One of our operators, Mark Schachter, VE3UU, I believe, has got that set up for us. So it's sort of a visual display for visitors to see the people we've been talking to around the world. Here's the right-hand side of the room, the way it looks now on the left, the way it looked then back in 1999 when we took over the room. So we've been able to fill that up pretty well. So here's a picture of a pair of artifacts, myself and Nick Shepard. Nick Shepard is our chief engineer, VE3UU. And this is the sign you see over the, just to give you an idea of museum challenges. See the sign over the map on the back wall, says Amateur Station VE3CWM. We had to wrestle with the museum to get that sign. And in the end, we had to pay for the sign ourselves because they wouldn't pay for it. So it's that kind of thing that gets aggravating when you're dealing with museum people. They know nothing about communications, and nor do they seem all that interested. So we continue to challenge them, even though of the 28 volunteers in the building, 20 of them are VRG volunteers. It's still a challenge. What we do is the VE3CWM operates when we can during visitor hours. I know one of the people on the Zoom call today, Fred VE3LAF, is one of our operators. And we try to get them in during the day to operate the stations, because the visitors absolutely rave about their interactions with the operators. We get nothing but kudos from them. One of the challenges we have, or I have, is making sure that our operators speak visitor and not radio. In other words, you can't say things like CW and SSB to a visitor who knows nothing about radio. They do understand Morse code. They do understand the term voice. So it's a bit of a challenge to get our guys to speak visitor rather than speaking radio. Notice the map on the back wall of the photo is a picture of the dual line. That was left behind by a movie company that rented the bunker in order to do a movie. And because of my background with the dual line, I decided to borrow the picture from them. Actually, they left it behind, so I didn't know what to do with it. So we stuck it on the wall up there. Most of the equipment you see in this room is owned by the VRG, not by the museum. We keep very separate records of who owns what, so that if the museum ever goes bankrupt or decides to close the door, we'll be able to take our equipment out without having to fight with a bailiff. Much of the equipment you see was donated to the VRG, not the museum. And as I mentioned earlier, what we can't use, we sell. So let's take a look at the active equipment going from left to right around the room. On the far left is the RCA single sideband, chipboard single sideband Mark V. It is a 5-channel unit, and it is permanently tuned to the ONTARS frequently. It still works, and we'll go on the air with ONTARS using that particular setup. Next in line, moving from that over to the right a bit, is the FT902DM. This is not our original one. This is a spare that we bought for, I think, $250 because we were concerned about ever losing our main artifact. So we've got this as a spare, still operational. We don't use it a whole lot. And then the picture on the right is our brand new Yaesu F2DX 101D. And we acquired that because we had an FT920, which was getting flaky. It would drop out in the middle of a QSO, pick up very quickly, but it was driving everybody crazy. And because we had about $6,000 or $7,000 left in our kitty, we decided to invest in the FT101D. So that's our latest addition to our setup. And it's extremely well liked by the operators. Again, moving along from left to right is the Hammerlin HXL1 linear. We purchased that at the Iroquois Hamfest for $150. Also, although it's not a very good picture, you can see the Yaesu FT920 there. It's still operational. We still use it. We use it more of a backup. And then moving again over to the right, you'll see the HW101 and a KW2000B display station. They're, again, donations to the bunker. That's not operational, but we leave it out there so people can see it. Now, this is the emergency transmitter room, the ETR. The ERR, emergency radio room, is next door. And the picture on the left is Robert Boyd, VE3UU, operating the original FT902DM. Also in the rack, we have a Collins 51J2 and our original FT101, which is still with us and still kicking around. The 51J2 just got removed this past weekend, and we replaced it with a Pi VHF set for display. So the displays and the equipment is constantly in flux and moving around as we decide what we want to do with it. Also in the emergency radio room is a vintage AM station, a HT129X Viking Ranger, operational, and we can still go on the air with that anytime we want. Of course, we do tend towards computers now for our logging and so forth. Then, so that's sort of the equipment lineup that VE3CWM has. We used to only have access to the museum on Tuesday evenings for you doing our work. They had to cut that out, but we are allowed in the museum anytime the museum is open, and we're beginning to get more and more operators in during the day. People who are maybe operating in a restricted zone in their home, or Fred has to operate off his balcony. Mark likes to come in and do CW, and he's got 800-900 contacts in there now in the last 5 or 6 months. So very active operators. And as I said, the visitors love it. They absolutely love it because they're seeing a live display. Frankly, sometimes we have to move just so that we don't look like a mannequin. And sometimes we've terrified some people who got caught off guard. So there's the equipment lineup for the emergency radio room and the emergency transmitter room. So let's take a look at the volunteer radio group lounge and playpen. I gleefully call it our clubhouse. So on this is one of the rooms that we took over from the building, actually a couple of rooms that we took over from the museum, and we do that with squatters' rights. We have learned over the years to never ask permission to do anything from the museum. What we do is we learn how to beg forgiveness. So we push the envelope as far as we possibly can and then back off when we annoyed somebody. But so far, we get along very well with the museum, particularly now that I'm the head volunteer and I've got such a long history that they tend to cut us a little bit of slack. Picture on the right is our sort of a sitting area. And to the left, if looking down that corridor, that's our equipment storage area. We got lots of that's where we keep our gear that we people are giving us or we've acquired and so forth, and we want to get rid of. The room you see straight ahead is our library, and that's also the picture on the right. We have a huge collection of QSTs. In fact, the library is now expanded to a second room. It's one of the doors on the left-hand side. I'm sorry, on the right-hand side in the left picture, because we have so many books. We probably have one of the most complete and largest collections of QSTs anywhere in Canada. And our volunteers are welcome to borrow anything they want from us. One of the other things we have that we're sort of famous for amongst the volunteers is our cookie jar. We insist that new volunteers, these come in with a couple of boxes of cookies, and we try to keep them supplied from time to time. I recently established some cookie jar rules rather. And one of them is that the cookies are available on an exchange basis. That means you can have as many as you want, but you have to replenish it from time to time. And as I point out in the rules, that for every person who takes a cookie without giving, someone has to give a cookie without taking. So we do not encourage cookie thefts, and we do have a couple of them in the bunch. Fred, fortunately, is not one of them. So some of the areas within the volunteer radio group is our work and test area. We have two of them. This is one area with two workbenches in there. Lots of test equipment. We have a Wiltron spectrum analyzer, all kinds of good stuff that we've accumulated over the years. Still use some of the old stuff. You'll see a URM 25 there, which belongs to me, on loan to the museum, a Q meter, all kinds of other gear that we have. So the volunteers are encouraged to bring in their own equipment and test it out here or use it. The equipment is available on loan for people if they want. Not a problem as long as they sign it out and bring it back. Our second area is where we keep a lot of our treasures, also known as junk. It's a little more of a machine room area. We have drill press, vices, and so forth that we can go and build things. Keep a lot of our bits and pieces in there and so forth. So lots of space that we can come in and work on stuff. You can't quite see it, but on the right-hand picture at the very back is an AR-88 receiver that got gifted to us a little while ago. We plugged it in about, when was it, last Saturday? Nick and I were in, we plugged it in, and it looks terrible, operates like a charm. It's got to be a 70, 80-year-old receiver. It's working, doing its stuff. So finally, antennas for the building. The picture on the left is the original 770-foot tower, which was left standing. The 324-foot tower was taken down, as were a couple of 100-foot towers. This tower is, we only connect to it. We don't use it, but we do have an end-fed, an all-band end-fed half-wave with one end connected to it. We also have, you'll see just barely in the photograph, we have two 40-meter verticals up there, which are original to the site. Most of the antennas on that site are there on a rental basis. So the building, the museum makes around probably a few $1,000s a month in revenue from the antennas on there. The antenna at the very, very top is the City of Ottawa Fire Department's VHF antenna. The antenna on the picture on the right is our new 55-foot tower with a TH5 beam. The tower and the beam were gifted to the museum, not ours. When that's the one we fought with for 5 years to try to get them to let us put it up. So we paid $1,000 for an engineering drawing on how to make a concrete hole, filled hole rather. We paid another 5 or 6 to McFarland to have them come out and install the tower for us. So it cost us all told around $6,000 or $7,000 to put that tower up. Again, the VRG paid for it itself. And now because it's up and the equipment belongs to the museum, it's now gifted back to them, so they have insurance liability, or they have liability for it and we don't, which is, it makes it just fine. And we're happy to move away from that. So that is it for a very fast overview of a hole in the ground. I'll open the channels up for any questions you might have at the moment. And I got one more slide to finish off with. Don't all talk at once, of course.
It's Tony here, V3DWI. Just wondering, do you know how thick the concrete walls are?
Yes, the building itself, around the outside perimeter, the walls are 2.5 feet of concrete. It sits on a 5-foot concrete plinth or base, and there's a 5-foot cover on it. So the top and bottom, ceiling and floors are 5 feet of concrete. Walls are 2.5 feet of concrete.
All right, and those 10 kilowatt transmitters, what frequency range were they operational on?
I'd have to go and look that up, but they were HF transmitters. I thought probably around 3 megahertz, if I remember correctly. The antennas were quite large. The antenna field in Richardson was 300 acres. The ones for our site at Elmont and Dunrobin were not quite as large, but they were only receive antennas out there. We did not transmit from the bunker at all.
All right, thank you.
Brian, Bruce, V3GBC here.
Yes,
How do they manage humidity in that bunker and air quality control?
It is a problem. We've had over the years moisture challenges. The building itself has no heating system. Never did. Because the building is underground, the temperature stays at around 18, 19 degrees. It's a little lower on the lowest level because heat tends to rise. So what we'll do during the day is turn on the air circulating equipment, bring that warm air from the top back down to the bottom and let it circulate. But in parts of the area, if we don't keep the air circulating, we'll get moisture and fungus build up around the walls. We pretty well got that under control now. We keep it monitored very carefully. But the building did undergo $1 million fire refit 10 or 12 years ago. We have another $2 million that have been granted to the museum, and they're going to be doing an air refit and getting air circulation equipment back up to standard again. One of the advantages of being a museum, quote unquote, is that you can tend to get grants a little more easier. The problem is, it's not a problem, but we are a private museum. So private museums, as you would be, are pretty well the bottom of everybody's list. But there's nothing wrong with calling yourself and establishing yourself as a museum, but I would hesitate to get too wrapped up in the formalities of it, or you may end up regretting it, just from an administrative nightmare point of view.
Roger, VE3RKS. I know the Kitchener bunker has issues of, you addressed a little bit with your moisture there with mold, but it's also got asbestos. Did you run into any of that sort of thing?
Yeah, our building is full of asbestos, absolutely chock-a-block full. So I used to tell visitors on the museum that this is a problem, just hold your breath for the remaining of the hour of the tour. Well, I got a few chuckles. There's nothing wrong with asbestos as long as it remains encapsulated. We are very cautious about drilling it or without taking precautions. When we had to do the major renovations with the fire alarm system, we actually shut the museum down and put huge ventilation systems in to suck the air out. It was overkill, but they felt they needed to do this. So as long as you do not disturb the asbestos, there's no real problem with it. But having said that, you'll get all kinds of people that are going to tell you it's all kinds of problems. No, don't. Be cautious. Be cautious. Just don't go to the extreme.
So, Brian, can you talk a bit more about who the formal owners of the museum are, and what would happen? Like you said, what if the museum goes bankrupt? So if the museum owns the bunker, then whose problem does it become? Does it somehow revert back to the government?
Yeah, no, I don't. It would be just become like if your house, if you decided to declare bankruptcy, your house would then be sold by a bailiff. So what would happen if first of all, the museum was set up as a not-for-profit organization. So it is a corporation. It's incorporated. It has a board of directors. I was on the board for about 12 years. I've been the museum's executive director for a while while we find a new director. So I've been in all the functions. And I've been with the museum on the board when we were essentially bankrupt. It cost around $8,000 a month to keep the lights on in that building, and we ran out of money. And I don't know how we managed to get through it all, but we got through, and the building is now, it gets probably has about 40% of its income, 40 to 60% by grants, and another 40 to, it varies, by visitors. It had, not last year, but the year before the shutdown, there were 70,000 people go through that museum. So it's very popular. It is, in fact, it is the single most popular non-governmental museum in Ottawa. So that's right up there. So there's an opportunity to turn your bunker into a similar kind of thing. If I were you, I'd be thinking about taking it off. I mean, your bureaucrats are going to stew forever. They will not make a decision. But if somebody went in and said, look, we'll buy it from you, or we'll take it off your hands, we will assume liability for it, give it to us, and we will look after it, chances are you might get the building. And then you have your own problems. You know, how do you look after it? Well, then come to that, make those decisions. In our case, we've been if the building goes under, if anybody goes bankrupt, any business goes bankrupt, the first thing that happens is the bailiff comes in and puts a lock on the door. That's why we're very careful about making a note of everything that belongs to us. We have one room in the building, our VRG lounge, that we have told the museum, anything in this room belongs to us. Now, we don't need to list everything, but if it's in this room, it is ours, and they've acknowledged that. But in the other rooms where we have equipment, we have it all listed by model number, who owns it, whether it's an individual loan or whether it belongs to the VRG. So if a bailiff came in, we would be able to come in with a list saying, we want to take our equipment out. It does not belong to the museum, and we should be safe.
Brian, I'd like to thank you very much for the excellent presentation that you gave this evening here on the Diefenbunker bunker. My name is John, VE3FDK, and we've met before at flea markets. I'm the licensee for VE3UU, Canadian Warplane Museum. So I congratulate you on the excellent presentation. And somebody scoffed about the helicopters. Well, I was using the SX-101A and 32B, doing a lot of phone patch traffic up to alert back in the 80s. So they did a marvelous job, and I'm glad to see you still with that NC300 behind you. Thanks again, Brian. John.
You're most welcome. I'm going to try to unshare this now if I can. So hang on a second.
Hi, Brian. It's Chuck Jeffrey.
I like your last name.
Jeffrey, same as yours. Same spelling as well.
Go for it.
So I really enjoyed your presentation. In the summer of 1971, I was in the Army Reserve as a teletype operator working in the Divert bunker in the relay station there.
Yeah.
And it was the old 5-digit ASCII teletype. So the second last slide you showed, the guy walking up the tunnel, when we were in the station for the whole summer, our quarters were in the bunker. So the only time we went out of the bunker was for meals or after our shift was over. Otherwise, we lived in the bunker. So it was a great presentation, and all of the rooms you showed in there, those same rooms were in the Divert bunker. There was a CBC radio station. There was the provincial cabinet rooms. There was the vaults, all the rest of it. They weren't being used because the rest of the station, the rest of the personnel were outside the bunker, but the bunker was there for everything. So thank you. It was a great trip down memory lane.
Those are the best kind. You have to take those trips before it gets overgrown.
Yeah. Apparently now the Divert bunker is a museum, the same as the one that you're involved with.
Yeah, they call themselves the Diefenbunker as well, and it's a bone of contention because those bunkers were never considered Diefenbunkers. But don't worry about it.
Yeah, no, the Diefenbunker was one for the federal government. There were 6 built in conjunction with that across Canada for the provincial governments. The one in Debert was supposed to look after the Maritimes. There was one in Quebec. There was Borden in Ontario, Shiloh in Manitoba. There was one in BC and one in Alberta, I think, was it?
Penhole, Alberta, and Nanaimo, BC.
Yeah.
I forgot Shiloh. That was the one that I forgot earlier. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions at all that I can field for you, gentlemen?
Brian,
Brian?
I am supporting the Diefenbunker in a small way.
I'll take anything I can get. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My wife wouldn't go through with me though.
Why was that?
Oh, I don't know. It's going down in that hole. Nope, that could happen.
It's just like being in a 10-story building without windows.
It's great. We stayed in the hotel. I think it was out Calgary area. When you wanted to go to your room, you went to the 3rd floor, but it was built on the side of a mountain. You went down. It was very confusing.
Yeah, the worst thing about spending time in the bunker is you never knew what time it was, what time of day it was, unless you looked at a clock, because it was just, you were locked away.
Yeah, I had the same problem when I was in the Arctic. In the wintertime, it was 24-hour darkness, and the summertime was 24-hour daylight. And it was very easy to get confused. I used to have to nail a blanket up over my window in order to get some darkness in the summertime.
Brian, it's Mark, VE3UU. I was there in September 2019, right after the Hamfest at Carp. And I noticed driving, once you drive off the road and you're going down the roadway of the property, I noticed to the right, just before you went down the hill, I saw a vertical. Now, was that one of the 40-meter verticals, or was that something else?
No, that was probably one of the 40-meter verticals.
Okay, so there was actually 2 of them, but it's funny because I don't remember seeing that other tower that you were talking about. I do remember seeing those verticals, but I sort of somehow missed that other tower, the 50 or 60 footer that you had with the beam on it.
That just went up late last year during the COVID stuff. When the building was shut down, we took advantage of a break in one of these lulls of the COVID to get it installed. So that's fairly new. I'm trying to remember. Fred might remember. I think it was probably the fall of September of last year.
Okay, so it wasn't there when I was there. Okay, that
You're
makes
not going
sense.
crazy. I mean, you may be, but not for that one.
Well, yeah, I'm already there, so.
Been there, done that.
Just a point there, the Canadian Warplane Museum is still closed until further notice. All doors are locked.
Yeah, we just shut our bunker down last Saturday. So Friday was our last day in. We'd only been back for a few weeks. So it's sad, you know. I saw an interesting sign on a restaurant on my driving home today from downtown. It said only 3 more lockdowns till Christmas. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for allowing me to be part of the group. It was a lot of fun for me to walk down my own memory lane with this stuff. And if I can answer any other questions, I'll hang around. Otherwise, back to you, Vic.
Okay, well, thank you, Brian. And thank you very much for preparing this excellent presentation, including a tour and your advice to us. And I'm sure there'll be a few more questions. Maybe I'll hand it over to Rick to kind of convey the presidential club, thanks to you.
No, thank you very much, Brian. Appreciate it. The depth of the presentation was spot on, and that's maybe, pardon the pun, but really enjoyed it. And the tips about dealing with museum bureaucracy and even how to approach ownership, how to really make it work for us here in Kitchener. Very good advice. Value it highly. Thank you, Brian.
You're most welcome. Most welcome.
Yeah, it's because we're really just at the start of this adventure for us, at the very beginning. So we got to work.
Remember, Rick, there's a gestation period, and it doesn't happen overnight. Governments, bureaucracy never moves quickly. In fact, I've often told people, and Fred's heard this from me on my face many times, that the museum bureaucracy moves at glacial speed, if at all. So whenever I want anything done, I got to plant the seed months in advance and push it along with a stick. It's terrible.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, thanks for the warning.
What often happens on some things like this is you may have a couple of questions afterward. I mean, I'll be in bed and sleep, so I don't want to hear from you. But send me an email if you get any other questions, or somebody says, "Gee, I wish I'd asked about this or I asked about that." Happy to accommodate. No problem.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
I have a question. I think you said your expenses are about $8,000 a month.
Yeah.
What's that composed of? It sounds
Electricity.
like a couple of employees.
Essentially electricity, trying to keep the lights on in the building. Yeah, and here's an example of museum challenges. I'll just pass this on to you. The building is equipped, I think we bring in 660 volt line that we then break down into multiple circuits for the building. We don't need probably half the power that we use, but I can't get the museum to do a study to figure out what, if they went to hydro and said, we don't want all this power, give us a smaller substation, we'd probably save $50,000, $100,000 a year, but I can't get them to invest the $20,000 to study to save 50. It's just their mind, they just can't do it.
Yeah, it's interesting how complex it really becomes. Our situation's far simpler, I think.
Yeah.
But maybe not. It'll come with a lot of challenges. Yeah. Oh, anyway, certainly won't end the group here, but we formally should end the meeting unless there's any club business. I'll ask for that. Is there anyone have?
Can I make just one quick comment before you wander down? I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, this is for everybody. I mentioned a few minutes ago, I've been to the Diefenbunker, and I will make a recommendation to everybody here. If you guys want to have a really good weekend, I mean a great weekend, hopefully this year, Hamfest will be back on again later in the year. Target the first Saturday in September. Brian knows what this is about. But the first Saturday in September, if it's a go this year, is the Ottawa Amateurs Club Hamfest, which is in Carp. And it's in a big arena. It's the only arena in Carp. So you go to the Hamfest in the morning, and there's a couple of great restaurants right across the street. You don't even have to drive your car. You just walk across the street. And when you're done, you drive a kilometer down the road and you're at Diefenbunker. That's what I did in 2019, and it was an entire day adventure. I was staying in Ottawa for the weekend, and my friend and I left our hotel at about 7 o'clock in the morning. We drove to Carp. We had breakfast. We went across the street to the Hamfest, spent the entire morning there, had lunch, and then we went down and spent about 3.5 hours at Diefenbunker. And I'll tell you, we had just a fantastic day. So a recommendation to all of you guys.
Well, thank you, Mark. Yeah, we've had field trips with the club before, not quite that far afield. We went to the Hammond Museum in Guelph, but this might work out. A field trip to Carp for the Hamfest and the tour.
Well, you also have the War Museum that you could throw in. It could be a weekend kind of.
No.
Drive up on. If you drive up on Friday night, you drive up Friday afternoon.
Yeah.
There's lots of great hotels in Ottawa. And then, like I say, you spend the day in Carp and do the Saturday deal in Carp. And then on Sunday, go to the War Museum. And the War Museum, I didn't get to see all of it, but it's unbelievable as well.
I'll just make a comment in regards to the Carp Hamfest. Don't go to it. There are no deals there. The Carp Hamfest is one of the best hamfests out there besides Kitchener.
No, Mike, that's not true. It is the best hamfest.
Yeah. Last year, well, before COVID hit, I managed to get to 23 hamfests, so I can tell you which ones are good. And any hamfest is a good hamfest, but there's also a wonderful farmers market there. The same morning as the hamfest, so your XYL can go there, and you can get lunch there too. Amazing venues there, and it's a great weekend. And if you've never been, I strongly recommend that you do go there, because the people there, a lot of fun. It is a top class hamfest, and the surroundings too. Just an amazing weekend.
If you ever decide to do that and you want to go to the Diefenbunker, let me know. I don't do a lot of the public tours anymore, but I have been tasked by the museum director to do private tours. And I'd be absolutely delighted to give you folks a private tour tailored to your own particular interests, rather than just the general public. And we would spend more time with the radio equipment and other areas than we might normally. So keep it in mind. I'd love to walk people through it, and I'd be happy to do that. I think they're limiting the tours now to only 10 people. So we may have to do a couple of them if you have a lot, but I'd be surprised if you got too many people up there. But happy to see you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Brian. That will certainly take up that offer. I can feel it in me bones. There's something developing here. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's going to happen. Maybe post-COVID, though. We'll see.
I'm only 80. I'm going to be hanging around for a little longer. So,
decades, sir, decades.
I'm hoping for it.
Good, do it. I'm sure you will.
Just lift an SX 101 or an NC 303 or something every day.
Yeah,
that'll keep you going.
I got my NC 300 behind me here, so there it is there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think we had at least 80 on tonight, and I'm stunned. Really, it's wonderful. Spot on, Brian. You brought them in. I think maybe even most of the students in our licensing course were here tonight. So that's really good news too. Yeah, fantastic. So with that, we should close the meeting. Any very last minute things?
Yeah, one last minute thing there. He left a lot of things out, because if he told you everything, you wouldn't be going there to see the rest.
Oh, couldn't fool you, eh?
Well, there's lots to see. My goodness, there's no doubt about it. And my goodness, all those, for us, I don't know how to put this, but the dial deprived nature of the hobby, it's so good to see so many dials and meters. It brings back so really good memories of older equipment. So I was really intrigued by the Viking Ranger and the 129X. That'd be one station I would just leap on, get going. I think I'd really enjoy working that one. Okay, well, good night, all. That's the meeting. A great meeting.
Thank you very much, Brian. That was
welcome.
really nice.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Appreciate it.
Yep, great job. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian.
Brian,
Thank you.
battery sized.